Gentle lady viewers and gentlemen viewers, good evening and welcome to episode number 76 of Historical Sketches. The philosopher Hegel demonstrated that all partial truths are falsehoods because partial truths are all the infinite half-truths that, stated without context and without qualifying their limits, become outright manipulation. Wherefrom it follows that great historical movements and events share, at their root, dynamics quite similar to those involved in the birth of great religions. Why? For example, at the onset of the Christian era, the primitive Christians were possessed with an unconquerable repugnance to the use and abuse of images. This aversion, as Gibbon pointed out in his Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, may be ascribed to the primitive Christians' descent from the Jews and possibly to a certain inherited racial religious enmity towards the Greeks. Enmity celebrated or at least involved, for example, in the current pseudo-religious Jewish festival and display of the menorahs. Nevertheless, as Shakespeare says, things that move sooner catch the eyes and what not stirs. Or, lacking movement, it is universally acknowledged that a picture is worth 1,000 words. In the instance, the first notice of the use of pictures in the Christian religion is actually in their censure during the little-known Council of Illiberis in year 300 AD. But under the successors of Constantine, in the peace and luxury of the triumphant church, the more prudent bishops condescended to indulge what was still retained a visible superstition for the benefit of the multitude. And after the ruin of paganism, the new generations of Christians were no longer restrained by the apprehension of an odious parallel. Painting and sculpture became then integral to the beauty and artistic wealth of Western Christian civilization. A fact, I think, that should not prevent us from realizing how visual representations, originally forbidden, became inseparable instruments of belief in the centuries to come, and that the history of religion is not as linear or consistent as some may want it to be. This apparently irrelevant introduction aims at preventing or at least reducing the ire of hatred of any among the viewers if here I will not speak of Hitler, of Stalin, and if there is time of Imperial Japan with the all but expected ritual hatred and ritual indignation. Beginning with Hitler, readers are no doubt acquainted with the uncalled for, deadly and devastating humiliation of Germany and her people following the end of World War I and the imposed decay of German economy and civilization associated with the Weimar Republic. None of us were present, but ample documentation shows uncanny similarities between Weimar Germany and some aspects of current life in the USA. The overprinting of currency has not reached the Weimar effect or volume due to known reasons that need not to be repeated, but culture-wise we can draw perhaps some parallels. An example is the euphemistically called cancel culture. As it is universally acknowledged, the cancel culture originated in universities and think tanks, generously nurtured by financial elites, many of which directly belonging or linked to an unmentionable sect. Where I live, Antifa and BLM have made a crusade of the destructions of monuments. Most of the downtown stores have permanently boarded up their windows, and many have supplemented the boarding of windows with metal fences to prevent or reduce the damage by determined cancel culturists. doubly reinforced metal and barbed wire fences permanently protect government buildings. And, as a further ornament to the city center, thousands of homeless people are sleeping in tents along the streets, a few in cars, a few in trailers. On the education front, as many readers no doubt already know, students are taught that races are a construct, and so is sex, and children are openly invited to doubt their own sexuality, whereupon they can be preventively subjected to suitable hormone therapies to acquire their preferred or natural identity or sexuality. An initiative is current to remove the term pedophile as offensive and substitute it with minor attracted person. It may be disgusting, but it's not surprising. After all, the now departed Supreme Court Justice Ruth Ginsburg proposed to lower to 12 the age of consent. And I recently visited the largest bookstore in Portland and could not find one Merry Christmas card, but many menorah cards. Freedom of speech is essentially abolished with the convenient excuse that social media companies are private. But a local and very private cake maker who refused to make a wedding cake for a gay couple incurred the vigor and vengeance of the law and ended up closing his store for not being able to sustain the legal costs of his defense. In California, store thefts up to $1,000 will no longer be prosecuted, and looters have actually organized themselves into assault gangs capable of withstanding the restraining efforts of the police. Where I live, many policemen have resigned or took early retirement fearing prosecution for doing their job, and in a current statement, the local Portland police declare that it can only prosecute the most egregious crimes due to staffing shortages. There is a pervasive media-induced hatred against ethnic whites, and typical is the following emblematic declaration by a Harvard academic recently departed, where he says, "The goal of abolishing the white race is on its face so desirable that some may find it hard to believe that it could incur any opposition other than from committed white supremacists. Keep bashing the dead white males, and the live ones, and the females too, until the social construct known as the white race is destroyed, not deconstructed, but destroyed. If you are a white male, you don't deserve to live. You're a cancer, you're a disease. White males have never contributed anything positive to the world. The key to solving the social problems of our age is to abolish the white race. Until the task is accomplished, even partial reform will prove elusive, because white influence permeates every issue in U.S. society, whether domestic or foreign. Treason to whiteness is loyal to humanity. The key to solving the social problems of our age is to abolish the white race. Whiteness is not a culture. Whiteness has nothing to do with culture and everything to do with social position. Without the privileges attached to it, the white race would not exist, and the white skin would have no more social significance than big feet. Unrelenting corporate media preaches hatred against whites, even endorsed by President Joe Biden, who, against an established habit of not interfering with the law, declared a recently absolved young white man from Wisconsin by the name of Kyle Rittenhouse a white supremacist. This Kyle Rittenhouse had traveled to Wisconsin to help in stemming the wave of destruction, now almost endemic in the country. He was armed, and when confronted and assaulted by 3 equally armed rioters, he used his own gun, and 2 assaulters died. On another front, and quoting from an article on the Los Angeles Times that aptly summarizes the current social situations at large, I quote from the article, "I don't care if Americans think we're running this news media, Hollywood, Wall Street, or the government. I just care that we get to keep running them, whereby we the author refers to an ethnic group that needs not to be named. But returning to one who cannot equally be named without being cursed, it was consonant to the spirit of the Weimar Republic, the longing for a Julius Caesar, a Peter the Great, or a New Age, perhaps a New Age Napoleon, who would put an end to all this. That it happened to be Hitler is one of the tricks of destiny, which, as we know, bars us the right of voluntary choosing. Unbeknown or disregarded by most, the first years of the regime were not ostensibly hostile or hostile to the Jews. For example, a medal was even coined in 1934 with on one side the swastika and on the other the Star of Israel. And this had to do with the promotion and celebration of the emigration of German Jews to Palestine, which, in turn, it should not be forgotten, had to do with the price paid by the Jews to England for issuing the Balfour Declaration, obtaining in return the intervention of America in World War I on the side of the British. In a condition, I think it should always be remembered, where there wasn't even a Pearl Harbor event or similar to justify America going to war in World War I. And, for the sake of historical accuracy, the first undeniable evidence of a racial war is in the header title of the English Daily Express of March 24, 1933, with the title "Judea Declares War on Germany." From all that we know from his writing and speeches, Hitler associated Russia with communism and by inference, communism with those who were equally predominant actors and contributors to the culture of the Weimar Republic, as recently confirmed by a source that needs no introduction, Vladimir Putin. It is possible or likely that Hitler ignored that the desire for a more egalitarian spirit among mankind, irrespective of the system of government, was deeply rooted in the Russian spirit, including intellectuals and even members of the nobility, meaning that Bolshevism was the aberrant mutation of an existing desire to improve the lot of mankind. That egalitarian spirit shows itself in the writings of the 19th century classics, as well as in the life of those nobles who give up their comfortable life in Russia to pursue, from the West, the humanitarian and political reforms they thought they could not carry out at home. The wealthy noblemen named Herzen and Bakunin are representative of this school, if you like, school or mode of thought. And if we let our imagination speculate, it is possible or even likely that Hitler only knew and associated Russia with the Bolsheviks, who, as openly and recently admitted by Putin, were all Jews, notably in the first Politburo and continuing up to the time of World War II. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who needs no introduction, gives ample documented evidence of all this in his two-volume study titled Deux siècles ensemble, which means 2 centuries together. I quoted the French because the book mysteriously has not been translated or printed into English and is unavailable in all American libraries as of now. In Solzhenitsyn's book and in many other records, the era of death, terror, gulags and famine following the 1917 revolution in Russia and notably in Ukraine is too well documented not to be admitted. Furthermore, we all individually know how difficult it is for pride to abandon prejudice and to subject prejudice to reason. Irrespective of Hitler's aim at Eastern expansion, these factors may have played a role in shaping Hitler's mindset, at least from reading the large volume of information, diaries, observations by his associates, subordinates, ambassadors, and by unbiased historians. The popular mind is long reconciled to relevant omissions and to the inconsistency of historical narratives. For example, England declared war on Germany because of Poland, but not on the USSR that had subdivided Poland with Germany, had occupied the Baltic states, Russia, and declared war on Finland. Instances that contradict the accepted narrative can fill a large volume, and it may help not to forget the purposeful wholesale slaughter in Dresden, a non-strategic town where 3 air raids killed 135,000 civilians, while the Russians were but 60 kilometers, 40 miles away, and plus many other instances for which here there is no time to describe them. Paradoxically, Churchill in his memoir about World War II only refers to the Dresden veritable genocide as an air raid on Dresden with many casualties. There is no absurd fantasy here about changing the course of history, only the somber consideration that the people resigned to the thoughts imbued and absorbed from one source only, and we know those who own the source is impermeable to the gradual influx of new opinions. But to end this tale of woe and brief excursus on a dead and unpopular dictator, the German people loved him, and to deny it would be an insult to history. Because in their loud and loyal acclamations they celebrated the merits of their temporal redeemer. And to say it again, historical truth does not equate to endorsement. There is no endorsement here, it's only an attempt at historical truth. As for Stalin, 2 unrelated contributions affect my views. For one, in recent years, after having read ample related material and books, I produced a series of 5 videos on the life of Stalin, which are available online. The other contributor is or are reflections on my visits to the USSR, the first when I was 20, and later when employed by an American corporation and sent to Moscow to demonstrate and sell equipment at various international fairs. During my first visits in Odessa, Yalta, and Sochi, I remember vividly the friendliness of the people and an admittedly perceived or imagined lack of obsession of competition that I associated with life in the West. I don't even know if I was right, but when to the session of sweet silent thought I summon up remembrance of things past, I think that then I saw Russia in the same light as Wordsworth, the English poet who visited France at the onset of the French Revolution. Admittedly, there were no revolutions in the Crimea and Ukraine that I visited. Actually, it was the contrary. Everything was at peace. But I think I detected a similarity of spirit as found in the following lines. Bliss was in the dawn to be alive, but to be young was very heaven. O times in which the meagre, stale, forbidding ways of custom, law, and statutes took at once the attraction of a country and romance. Meaning that the local ways, custom, and probably laws seemed to so different as to create the air and attraction of a country in romance. In different settings and circumstances, my subsequent visits to Moscow did not substantially change my first impressions. It should also be added that, in some ways, Bolshevism, as most of us may agree, a tragic, unbelievable history of diabolical horror, was extinguished by the Great Patriotic War. And it is meaningful, though completely overlooked by official history, that in the midst of 1942, Stalin's attitude towards religion changed, or let us say shifted. He met with the hierarchs of the Russian Orthodox Church and allowed the clergy to perform religious services, celebrate Easter and Christmas, because people at large need, or perhaps must, have an ideal goal in sight, that transcends, a goal that transcends the limits of materialism, notwithstanding that materialism is, or actually was, the cornerstone of Marxist doctrine. As for Stalin's life and character, I found particularly interesting his relatively rare exchanges with his mother, who continued to live modestly in Georgia even when he was the undisputed dictator of the USSR. She, for example, sent him yearly the jams that she made, along with some Georgian homemade cookies and specialties. Perhaps unknown by most, Stalin was an avid reader, a trait that usually broadens the view of the world and peoples. When he died, his library amounted to about 20,000 volumes. He read incessantly and had a habit of making notations and comments on the margins of the books he read. About 5,000 books have his own handwritten notations and comments. Among the university reforms and developments that the Soviet Union undertook, linguistics acquired notable importance. And linguistics was Stalin's special interest, with special emphasis on the Georgian language. And in his youth he had even composed poems in Georgian, and some had been published when he was studying at the seminary. At the time of this anecdote, the Soviet guru in the field of linguistics was an expert specialist named Nikolai Marr, actually half Scottish and half Georgian. We could say that he was more an archaeologist than a linguist, but for reasons irrelevant to this anecdote, Marr was the undisputed and unquestionable authority in the field. He proposed theories that other diligent and qualified scholars could not accept. However, in the climate of the times, objections to an approved ideological line put the objector in the camp of the heretics, with unhappy, as we know, with unhappy consequences. By the way, the current climate in American universities at large is not dramatically different. Teachers who are lukewarm to the cancel culture, the woke culture, Antifa, BLM, all these ideologies, not to speak of COVID, run the risk of expulsion, and vocal opponents are actually dismissed. In Georgia, the leading expert of Georgian and Caucasian languages was a certain Professor Chikobava. He had been dismissed from his post as a lecturer by the secretary of the Central Committee of the region, we mean in Georgia, for being an anti-Marian, not anti-Marxist, anti-Marian, Mar being, as I said, the current linguistic standard bearer. And this Professor Chikobava was declared a Trotskyist in linguistics and other similar negative attributes. Other professors in Russia, dismissed for similar reasons, wrote to Stalin, but their letters never reached him. And this is hardly a local habit of Russia. Writing today even to a local representative may, at best, and even then rarely, receive a formal pre-printed acknowledgement letter signed by a staff employee. But this Professor Chikobava found the friend insufficiently introduced and able to ensure that his letter would reach Stalin in person. After reading the letter, Stalin summoned this professor to his dacha in Kuntsevo, which is a district of Moscow, along with 3 other Georgian dismissed linguistic academics. I skipped the details here, but that dinner session at Kuntsevo lasted until 7 o'clock in the morning, next morning, with Stalin discussing the professor's massive dictionary of the Georgian language and various other related issues of linguistics. Very late in the first morning hours, Stalin called up the commissar, who was called Arutinov, who had dismissed the non-orthodox linguistics teachers in Armenia and in Georgia. Stalin asked the commissar about the 2 dismissed professors. Did he know them? and the commissar acknowledged that he did know them, but said that they were no longer at their post. "Who are they?" asked Stalin. "Scholars, academicians," answered the commissar. At this, Stalin said, "By what you tell me, I thought they were accountants, who can lose their job in one place and be placed in another. You are much in a hurry, Comrade Arutinov, too much in a hurry." And at the point Stalin put down the phone. At the moment at the moment of the night, the terrified commissar summoned his aides and went immediately to the house of Professor Chikobava and told his terrified wife that her husband had just been appointed director of the Republic's Institute of Languages. Eventually, Stalin himself wrote an article for the Pravda titled "On Marxism and Linguistics," which was broadcast through the land and read by a famous announcer, the same who had also read all the orders of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief during the Second World War. Naturally, the course of linguistics ceased to be based on the silly notion that language reflects the class struggle, which was the position of the guru in the field. The easy deduction from all this is that, through a coalition of circumstances impossible to examine in detail, a climate had developed whereby an approved line of thought became indisputable, even in cases when Stalin did not know or hardly knew anything about it. This culture, for lack of a better word, is hardly unique to the Stalin era, but what makes it more noticeable or noteworthy is a certain ironic or sarcastic and amusing undertone. And similar situations and characters are found among the writings, for example, of the Russian classics. A Russian novel that I cannot remember begins with a tirade against the bureaucratic mind of some government employees who cause food to be spoiled due to the length of time needed to comply with the filling up of forms, a task required by higher and unseen authorities. And on a personal note, on my arrival and departure from the Moscow airport so many years ago, I found it consistently amusing a certain expression of satisfaction in the custom office as they raised their hands and with force and a loud thump they applied the needed stamp on my passport. What is not amusing is the remarkable analogy affecting the Western world that can be drawn between the Marxist theory of language and the current theory of vaccines and viruses. The almost incredible ease with which the current Western scientific nomenclatura can pretend and expect that citizens and their families comply with measures affecting directly their physical life. The position on Russia on vaccines is somewhat mysterious. On one hand, from what the inexperienced can understand, Russian vaccines, unlike the Western counterparts, can be correctly so called, as they do not contain elements that can be considered live. On the other hand, the same universal adherence to the pandemic doctrine officially applies. Still, I read recently that at other levels of the Russian Orthodox Church, including bishops and believers, there has been much greater skepticism towards issues ranging from lockdown measures to vaccinations and so forth. But from the little I learned from internal Russian sources, dissident clergy have been silenced. I was hoping to include in this episode some considerations about Pearl Harbor, considering that even today, 80 years after the event, some crucial related information is kept secret. The subject, I would think, deserves attention. Perhaps it will be the subject of another episode later on. Thank you for watching. See you next time. And as always, may all the number of the stars give light to your fair way. Good night.